Picture this. It's a January night in the year 1320, and you're lying in a castle bedchamber somewhere in the English countryside. The stone walls around you are 3 feet thick, built to withstand sieges and arrows, not to keep you warm. Outside, a winter wind howls across the battlements, finding every crack, every arrow slit, every imperfection in the mortar. The sound is relentless, a low moan that seems to seep into your very bones. You pull the heavy wool blanket tighter around your shoulders, but it's not enough. It's never quite enough. The floor beneath you is stone, cold, unforgiving stone that seems to radiate chill upward through the rushes scattered across it. Your breath mists in the air before your face, a ghostly reminder that the temperature inside isn't much different from outside. Somewhere down the corridor, you hear the clatter of a shutter banging loose, and you wonder if anyone will brave the cold to secure it, or if everyone will simply burrow deeper into their blankets and pretend not to hear. This is castle life in medieval times, and tonight we're going to explore one of history's most practical mysteries. How did people survive sleeping in these stone fortresses without freezing to death? How did they endure winter after winter in buildings that were essentially giant refrigerators made of rock? Before we dive into this cozy exploration of medieval survival, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where in the world you're drifting off from tonight. Now, settle in. Maybe adjust your pillows, pull up your blanket, and let's journey together into the cold heart of a medieval castle. You're in the solar, a private chamber reserved for the Lord's family, which means you're among the lucky ones. Most people in this castle don't have private rooms. They sleep in the great hall, in corridors, in whatever corner they can claim. But even here, in this relatively privileged space, the cold is your constant companion. The walls are hung with tapestries, thick woven scenes of hunting and feasting. But they're not just decoration. They're insulation, a barrier between you and the stone. Though on nights like this, they feel desperately inadequate. A small brazier glows in the corner, filled with charcoal that one of the servants replenished before retiring. It casts a faint orange light and radiates a sphere of warmth that extends perhaps 3 feet in any direction. Beyond that circle, the cold reigns supreme. You've positioned your bed as close to it as you dare. Any closer, and you risk the smoke, or worse, a stray ember setting your bedding alight. It's happened before in castles across the realm. Fire is both savior and threat, and you've learned to respect both aspects. The bed itself is your fortress within the fortress. It's a heavy wooden frame with a canopy above and thick curtains on all sides, curtains you've already drawn closed. Inside this fabric cocoon, you've created a smaller, slightly warmer world. The curtains are made of heavy wool, dyed a deep red that's faded over the years. They trap what little warmth your body generates and keep out the worst of the drafts. Medieval people understood something we've forgotten in our centrally heated age. Small spaces are easier to warm than large ones. Your bed is essentially a room within a room, and right now, it's the difference between discomfort and genuine danger beneath you. The mattress is stuffed with straw and topped with a feather bed, a luxury that marks your status. The straw rustles when you move, and you can feel the occasional poke of a stem that's worked its way through the ticking. It's not particularly comfortable by modern standards, but it provides crucial insulation from the bed frame. You've learned that what's beneath you matters just as much as what's on top. Cold rises from below, seeping through any gap. So the more layers between you and the base, the better. On top of you, there are more layers. A linen sheet, somewhat scratchy but clean. A wool blanket, heavy and smelling faintly of lanolin and smoke. Another blanket of even heavier wool. And finally, a fur coverlet made from rabbit pelts stitched together, the ultimate luxury. Even with all this, you're wearing your chemise, a long linen shift that covers you from neck to ankle. Your feet are wrapped in wool stockings, and you're wearing a nightcap to prevent heat loss from your head. Medieval people knew about heat loss before scientists had a name for it. They learned through cold, hard experience. You can hear the castle settling around you, timbers creaking, stone expanding and contracting. Somewhere far below, in the great hall, the main fire still burns, tended through the night by a servant whose job is to keep it alive. That fire is the heart of the castle, and even up here, 2 floors above it, you take comfort knowing it's there. If the cold becomes truly unbearable, you could go down there, join the servants and dogs sleeping on benches and floors near the hearth. There's no shame in it. Survival trumps pride. On nights like this, the arrow-slit window, narrow as a hand's width, is shuttered with wood, but it's not airtight. You can feel the draft from here, a thin stream of frigid air that cuts across the room like an invisible blade. In summer, these slits provide ventilation and light. In winter, they're tortures, necessary evils that can't be fully sealed without plunging the room into total darkness during the day. Someone has stuffed rags around the edges, but the wind is persistent, finding its way through. This castle was built in 1280, during the reign of Edward I. Its primary purpose is defense. The thick walls that make it so cold are what keep it safe from attack. The high ceilings, which allow heat to escape upward, also make it harder for enemies to use fire as a weapon. The minimal windows, which restrict light and warmth, prevent arrows from finding their mark. Every feature that makes this place defensible makes it uncomfortable. It's a trade-off medieval people accepted without question. You can't defend comfort. You can defend stone. The moisture is another problem. Stone doesn't just conduct cold. It attracts and holds moisture. You can feel the dampness in the air, see it sometimes as a sheen on the walls when morning comes. It gets into everything: the bedding, your clothes, your bones. Some chambers develop actual ice on the interior walls during the worst cold snaps. You've seen it yourself, delicate crystals forming in corners where condensation freezes overnight. It's beautiful in a terrible way. Nature's reminder that these structures, mighty as they are, can't fully protect you from her power. You shift position, and the bed curtains sway slightly, letting in a puff of colder air. You quickly still, waiting for your cocoon to rewarm. Outside your bed, outside your chamber, outside the castle walls, the winter night stretches on. But here, layered in wool and linen and fur, enclosed in fabric and stone, you're doing what humans have always done. You're adapting, enduring, surviving. And as uncomfortable as it is, as cold as you might be, you're alive, you're safe. And eventually, wrapped in your medieval fortress of blankets, sleep will come. You're standing now in the corridor outside your chamber, a rush lamp flickering in your hand, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. It's early morning, before dawn, and you're beginning to understand why castles are so impossibly cold. It's not an accident. It's not poor planning. It's the inevitable consequence of building for war instead of comfort. Every stone, every archway, every soaring ceiling is designed with one purpose: to keep enemies out and defenders alive. Warmth, unfortunately, was never part of the blueprint. The walls around you are limestone, quarried from nearby hills and hauled here by cart and ox over months of labor. They're 3 feet thick in most places, thicker still at the base and around vulnerable points like gatehouses. When you press your palm against the stone, it feels like touching ice, a cold so profound it seems to pulse. Stone is an excellent thermal mass, which means it absorbs and holds temperature. In summer, this works in your favor. The thick walls stay cool even when the sun beats down, providing relief from heat. But in winter, the opposite is true. The stone absorbs the cold from outside and radiates it inward, creating a chill that no fire can fully counter. The ceiling above you vaults upward, disappearing into shadows even with your lamp. It's icily 20 feet high, maybe more. High ceilings are a feature of castle great halls and major chambers, designed to impress visitors and accommodate large gatherings. But they're a disaster for heat retention. Heat rises, a principle medieval people understood through observation even without scientific explanation. Every bit of warmth generated by fires or bodies floats upward, gathering uselessly near the ceiling, while the lower levels, where people actually live, remain frigid. Some castles tried to counter this with wooden ceilings installed below the stone vaults, creating a lower, more manageable space. But most simply accepted it as the price of grandeur. You walk slowly down the corridor, your footsteps echoing. The floor is stone as well, covered here and there with rushes, dried reeds, and grasses strewn about to provide a bit of insulation and absorb moisture. They rustle under your feet, releasing a faint herbal scent. Some castles mix the rushes with lavender or sweet woodruff, pleasant smells to counter the general mustiness. But the rushes do little to stop the cold radiating up from the stone below. You've learned to wear thick-soled shoes or boots inside, never going barefoot even in summer. In winter, your feet would go numb in minutes without protection. An arrow slit interrupts the wall to your right, a narrow vertical opening that widens toward the inside. You approach it cautiously, knowing what's coming. Even from 3 feet away, you can feel the draft, a stream of cold air pouring through the gap like water from a spout. These slits are ingenious defensive features, allowing archers to fire outward while presenting minimal target area to attackers outside. But they're also architectural nightmares for temperature control. Each one is a breach in the castle's envelope, a direct channel for cold air to enter. Some slits have wooden shutters that can be closed when not needed for defense, but many don't. Even shuttered ones aren't airtight. Wind finds the gaps, exploits them, sends icy fingers probing into every room. The windows are only slightly better. True glass windows are rare, expensive luxuries found only in the wealthiest castles and usually only in the chapel or the Lord's private chambers. Most windows are simply openings in the wall, sometimes covered with oiled parchment or linen to let in light while blocking some wind. These coverings tear easily and provide minimal insulation. You've seen ice form on the inside of window coverings during particularly cold nights. The moisture in the indoor air freezing on contact with the cold membrane. It's a reminder that inside and outside are separated by only the thinnest barriers. Moisture is everywhere in this castle, and it makes the cold worse. Stone walls weep with condensation, especially in winter when the temperature differential between inside and outside is greatest. The air holds moisture from breath, from cooking, from the occasional bath, and when that warm, moist air meets cold stone, water condenses. You can see it glistening on the walls, feel the dampness in the tapestries and bedding. Mold grows in corners, dark patches that smell of earth and decay. The constant battle against damp is exhausting. Servants air out bedding whenever the weather permits, hanging it over walls or laying it in rare sunny spots. But it's never quite dry, never quite warm. The staircases are the worst. They're usually built into the thickness of the walls, tight spiral affairs that climb from floor to floor. As you ascend one now, the cold seems to intensify. These spaces are unheated, unlit, except for what your lamp provides. And the stone here is even colder, untouched by any warmth from inhabited spaces. The steps are worn smooth by centuries of feet, slightly hollowed in the center. You grip the central column for balance, and the stone under your hand is so cold it burns. Some parts of the castle are never warm, not even in summer. The dungeons and storage cellars below ground maintain a constant chill, which is useful for preserving food but miserable for anyone who must work there. The guard rooms in the towers, exposed to wind on multiple sides, are notoriously frigid. Guards on night watch wrap themselves in every available layer and still shiver through their shifts. Frostbite is a real danger for those stationed on exposed battlements. During winter storms, you've heard tales of other castles, grander ones, that have elaborate heating systems. Conway Castle in Wales, you've heard, has fireplaces in multiple chambers, a luxury almost unimaginable. Some French castles have hypocaust systems, inspired by ancient Roman technology, with heated air circulating under floors. But those are rare, expensive, and often impractical in defensive structures where such systems can be liabilities. Most castles make do with simple fireplaces in major rooms and braziers that can be moved where needed. The architect who designed this castle, probably a master mason whose name is lost to history, made certain choices. Thick walls for defense, high ceilings for status, minimal openings for security. Each decision was logical, necessary even, given the castle's purpose. But the cumulative effect is a structure that fights against human comfort at every turn. The stone that protects you also chills you. The height that impresses also wastes heat. The small windows that shield also darken and freeze as you return to your chamber, lamp in hand. You think about how different this is from the wooden halls of earlier centuries, or the Wattalandaub cottages of peasants. Those structures were drafty too, but wood holds warmth better than stone, and smaller spaces are easier to heat. Castles represent a choice, security over comfort, permanence, and on cold nights, you feel that choice in your bones. But you also understand it. When enemies approach, when arrows fly, when siege engines batter at walls, you'll be grateful for every thick stone, every soaring vault, every defensive feature. For now, though, you're just cold, and understanding why doesn't make it any warmer. The Great Hall is the beating heart of castle life. And nowhere is this more true than on winter nights when the central hearth blazes. You descend the spiral staircase, your footsteps echoing in the narrow space. And already you can smell it. Smoke, burning oak, the faint scent of roasting meat from dinner hours ago. As you push open the heavy wooden door, warmth hits your face like a physical force. Such a contrast to the frigid corridors that you almost gasp. The hall stretches before you, vast and dim in the pre-dawn darkness. It's easily 60 feet long and 30 wide, with a vaulted ceiling that disappears into shadows above. Tapestries line the walls, depicting hunting scenes and battles, their colors muted in the firelight. Trestle tables are pushed to the sides, the benches stacked against the walls, clearing floor space for those who sleep here. And there are many. You count perhaps 20 people, servants, and lower household members, curled on benches or wrapped in blankets on the floor, positioned in a rough circle around the hall's greatest treasure, the central hearth. A raised stone platform in the center of the hall, about 12 feet across and 2 feet high. On it, a fire burns with determined intensity, flames leaping and crackling, sending up showers of sparks that rise toward the ceiling. The fuel is oak logs, massive things as thick as a man's torso and 6 feet long, laid in a careful arrangement that allows air to circulate while providing maximum burn time. Oak is prized for its even, long-lasting heat. A well-built oak fire can burn through the night with only occasional tending, unlike softer woods like pine that burn hot and fast and fill the hall with choking smoke. You move closer, stepping carefully around sleeping forms. The heat intensifies with each step, a gradient from cold to bearable to warm to almost too hot. Those sleeping closest to the fire, you notice, have positioned themselves carefully. They're near enough to benefit from the warmth, but not so close that flying sparks pose a danger. Their blankets and cloaks are wool, not linen, which would ignite too easily. Several dogs are interspersed among the humans, large hunting hounds that add their body heat to the collective warmth and serve as living blankets for those lucky enough to have one pressed against them. The social hierarchy of fire. Access is unspoken but absolute. The Lord and his family sleep upstairs in private chambers with their own smaller fires or braziers. Here in the hall, the positions closest to the hearth go to senior servants, the steward, the marshal, the head cook, people of status within the household structure. Further out are the lesser servants, kitchen workers, stable hands lucky enough to be allowed inside on particularly cold nights. And furthest from the fire, in the coldest reaches of the hall, are the lowest members, those with least seniority or favor, who make do with whatever warmth reaches them above the fire. There's no chimney in the traditional sense. Smoke rises naturally, drawn upward by heat, and escapes through a louvre in the ceiling, a wooden structure with slats that allows smoke out while theoretically keeping rain from coming directly down. It doesn't work perfectly. Some smoke always lingers, creating a hazy layer that hangs in the upper reaches of the hall. You can taste it, acrid and sharp, and by morning everyone's eyes will be red and watering. But it's a trade-off everyone accepts. Smoke means fire. Fire means warmth. A smoky hall is better than a frozen one. The fire tender sits on a stool nearby, a young man whose job for the night is to keep the hearth alive. He's wrapped in a heavy cloak, hood up, and every hour or so he rouses himself to add another log or adjust the existing ones with a long iron poker. It's a position of responsibility. If the fire dies, everyone suffers, and the labor of rekindling it from scratch is considerable. Better to maintain it through the night, feeding it steadily, ensuring those massive oak logs never fully burn through. You watch as he works now, using the poker to roll a partially burned log toward the center where the heat is most intense. Sparks fountain upward, bright orange against the darkness, and the flames surged briefly before settling back. The wood hisses and pops, pockets of moisture or sap turning to steam and exploding in miniature bursts. The smell is wonderful, rich and woody, with hints of the forest these logs once stood in. Oak from the castle's own woods, felled in autumn when the sap is down, seasoned for a year or more to ensure dry burning. But even this impressive fire has limits. Stand right next to the hearth, and the heat is almost unbearable, scorching your front while your back remains cold. Facing away from the flames into the chilly hall, move 10 feet away and the warmth diminishes noticeably. 20 feet away, at the edges of the hall, you're back to huddling in cloaks and blankets. Heat disperses quickly in a space this large, especially with high ceilings that allow it to rise and dissipate. The stone walls, those same walls that keep the castle cold, absorb heat rather than reflecting it, turning warm like giant radiators if you stand very close, but drawing heat away from the air. Some castles have solved this problem, partially by building fireplaces into the walls, with proper chimneys to draw smoke upward and outward. These are more efficient, reflecting heat back into the room rather than letting it escape overhead. But they're also more expensive and require significant architectural planning. This castle, built in an earlier era, uses the older central hearth design. It's communal, democratic in a way, the fire belonging to everyone rather than warming just one wall or corner. But it's also less efficient, losing much of its heat to the vast space above, around the hearth. You see the evidence of people's attempts to maximize warmth. Blankets are arranged to create wind blocks, rough screens that keep drafts from the door from reaching sleepers. People sleep in clusters, family groups, or work companions huddled together to share body heat. Someone has draped a large piece of canvas from ceiling beams down toward the floor, creating a rough tent around one section of sleepers, trapping warmth in a smaller volume. It's ingenious, this improvised architecture within architecture. People creating their own modified spaces within the larger cold hall. The fire pops loudly, startling one of the dogs, which raises its head briefly before settling back with a grunt. You find an empty spot on a bench not far from the hearth, close enough to feel genuine warmth, and sit. The wood is hard beneath you, worn smooth by countless others who've sat here before. But there's a folded blanket someone left that you arrange as cushioning. Within minutes, you can feel your body relaxing, the constant tension of cold easing from your shoulders and back. This is why people gather here, why the Great Hall remains the true center of castle life. It's not just tradition, it's survival. The fire makes life bearable, transforms the castle from a stone prison to something almost comfortable. And as you sit there, feeling warmth soak into your bones, you understand why medieval people spoke of the hearth with such reverence. It wasn't poetic metaphor, it was simple truth. The fire was life, and the hall that housed it was home. You climb the stairs again as dawn approaches, the great hall's warmth fading with each step upward. The stone spirals upward through the thickness of the wall, cold and damp under your hand, and you emerge onto the second floor where the private chambers are located. This is the solar, the term coming from the French soleil for sun, because these rooms have actual windows designed to catch daylight. But right now, before dawn, they're dark and frigid. The windows shuttered tight against the winter wind. Your chamber door is heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands, and it creaks on iron hinges as you push it open. Inside, the space is modest by modern standards, but luxurious by medieval ones. Perhaps 15 feet square, with a ceiling that slopes following the roofline above. The walls are stone, of course, but they're covered with hangings, tapestries on 2 walls depicting garden scenes, and on the others, heavy wool fabric dyed a deep green. These hangings serve a crucial purpose beyond decoration. They create an air gap between the cold stone and the living space, a layer of insulation that makes a measurable difference in comfort. The room's centerpiece is the bed, and it dominates the space. This isn't a simple sleeping platform. It's a substantial piece of furniture. A wooden frame raised about 2 feet off the floor, roughly 6 feet long and 5 feet wide. 4 carved posts rise from the corners, extending 8 feet high, and between them, a wooden canopy is fixed permanently. From this canopy, heavy curtains hang on all 4 sides, dark red wool that's faded to burgundy with age and use. These curtains are crucial. When drawn, they transform the bed into a room within the room, a private, warmer space isolated from the chamber's cold air. You approach the bed, and even from outside the curtains, you can see how it's constructed for maximum warmth retention. The base is a wooden lattice, and on this sits a large fabric bag stuffed with straw, the basic mattress that provides support and insulation from the cold wood below. On top of this is a second, smaller mattress, this one stuffed with feathers, a luxury that marks your status as nobility or upper household. Feathers provide better cushioning than straw and additional insulation. This Tulier system means you're sleeping with perhaps 8 inches of insulating material beneath you, separating your body from the cold that wants to seep upward. But the real warmth comes from what's on top. The bedding is piled in layers, a technique medieval people perfected through cold experience. First, directly against the mattresses, is a linen sheet, somewhat rough by modern standards, but clean and changed regularly, or at least as regularly as the household laundry schedule allows. On top of this is a wool blanket, heavy and thick, weighing perhaps 10 pounds. The wool still smells faintly of lanolin and smoke, having been washed in the castle laundry and dried near the kitchen fires. Above this is another blanket, even heavier, perhaps 12 or 15 pounds of tightly woven wool. The top layer is where status really shows. This is a coverlet made of furs, rabbit pelts, in your case, dozens of them stitched together into a large, luxurious covering. In wealthier households, this might be fox, marten, or even bear. The fur is worn, patches of it rubbed thin, but it's still effective, providing a final layer of insulation and a bit of psychological comfort. There's something primal about sleeping under fur, something that makes the cold less threatening. Your ancestors, 1,000 years ago, would have recognized and envied this covering. Pillows are stacked at the head of the bed, 3 of them stuffed with down for softness and covered in linen cases. Down, like feathers, is expensive, harvested from geese and ducks, and represents significant investment. A single goose might provide only an ounce or 2 of down, meaning these pillows represent the plucking of dozens of birds. But down is worth it, providing soft support for your head while also insulating your skull from heat loss. You'll sleep with a linen cap on your head as well, because medieval people knew that significant body heat escapes through the head, even if they didn't understand the physiology behind it. At the foot of the bed, you notice something else, a wooden chest, and on top of it, wrapped in cloth, are several stones, each about the size of a loaf of bread. These are bed warmers, heated in the great hall's fire before being carried upstairs. A servant brought them earlier, using tongs and thick cloths to handle the hot stones, and placed them in the bed to warm the sheets before you retired. By now they've cooled, but they served their purpose, taking the lethal chill off the bedding. Some households use warming pans instead, metal containers with long handles that hold hot coals, designed to be run between the sheets. But stones are simpler, and they hold heat well. Cooling slowly through the night, you draw back the bed curtains, and immediately the temperature drops. Outside the curtains, the chamber is perhaps 45 degrees, cold enough to make you shiver. Inside the bed, trapped warmth from earlier and residual heat from the stones has created a microclimate that's noticeably warmer, perhaps 55 or 60 degrees. It's still not what we'd consider comfortable, but it's survivable. You climb in quickly, pulling the curtains shut behind you, sealing yourself in this fabric cocoon. The mattresses compress under your weight, straw rustling audibly. You're still wearing your chemise, the long linen shift that covers you from neck to ankles, and you've added wool stockings on your feet. Some people sleep in even more, layering shirts or keeping their day clothes on entirely. There's no shame in it. Vanity is a luxury the cold doesn't permit. You pull the covers up, the weight of them substantial and comforting, and arrange them carefully, ensuring no gaps where cold air could creep in. The bed curtains are thick enough to be nearly opaque, creating a darkness inside the bed. You can hear the wind outside, howling around the castle's towers, but it's muffled, distant. Inside your curtained sanctuary, there's a sense of security, of safety, despite the cold. This bed is your fortress, and the curtains are its walls. They trap not just warmth, but also a sense of privacy and peace that's rare in castle life. In other parts of the castle, sleeping arrangements are far less luxurious. In the great hall, which you left a short while ago, people sleep on benches or on the floor, clustered around the central hearth. They have blankets, but not the layers you enjoy. They have the fire's warmth, but they're also exposed to every draft, every opening of the door. Servants, in the kitchen quarters, sleep on pallets near the ovens, taking advantage of residual heat from cooking fires. In the barracks, soldiers sleep on simple beds or straw-filled mattresses, sometimes 2 or 3 to a bed in the coldest weather, using body heat to stay warm. The practice of sharing beds was common across all social classes, though with different implications. Servants might share out of necessity, while nobility might have bed companions, chamberlains, or ladies-in-waiting, who served but also provided warmth and company through long, cold nights. Children always shared, sometimes 4 or 5, to a bed, a tangle of small bodies generating collective warmth. Even strangers might share at inns or in castle guest quarters. The cold, overriding concerns about privacy or propriety as you settle deeper into your layered bedding. You think about how much effort goes into this simple act of sleeping warmly. The sheep that provided the wool, sheared in summer, and the wool processed, cleaned, carded, spun, and woven into blankets. The geese that provided the down, carefully plucked to preserve the feathers. The trees that provided the wood for the bed frame, cut and shaped by skilled carpenters. The seamstresses who stitched the rabbit pelts together. The servants who heated stones and hauled them upstairs. Sleep in a medieval castle isn't simple. It's the culmination of dozens of people's labor and centuries of accumulated knowledge about surviving the cold. And as your body heat slowly warms the cocoon of blankets around you, as the bed curtains hold that warmth close, as sleep finally approaches, you feel grateful for every layer, every thoughtful design element, every bit of effort that makes this bearable. The castle may be cold, but here, in this moment, you're almost warm inside your bed cocoon, surrounded by curtains and covered in layers of wool and fur. You're wearing what passes for sleepwear in the 14th century. It's not much different from what you wore during the day, with a few strategic additions. Medieval people didn't have the luxury of specialized pajamas or nightgowns as we know them. Instead, they adapted their undergarments and added pieces specifically designed to retain heat through the long, cold nights. The foundation of your sleeping attire is the chemise, a long linen shift that serves as both underwear and nightgown. It's a simple garment, essentially a T-shaped piece of fabric with sleeves extending from your shoulders to your ankles. The linen is somewhat rough, woven from flax that was grown in local fields, retted in ponds to separate the fibers, then spun and woven by women in the village or castle. The fabric has been washed many times, softening it somewhat, but it's nothing like the silky smoothness of modern linens. It scratches slightly against your skin, a sensation you've long since stopped noticing. Linen might seem like an odd choice for cold weather, and indeed, it's not as warm as wool. But medieval people chose it for practical reasons. Linen can be washed frequently without falling apart, unlike wool, which shrinks and felts when scrubbed too hard. Since this garment sits directly against your skin, absorbing sweat and body oils, washability is crucial. The chemise is your barrier between body and outer layers, and keeping it relatively clean helps prevent skin problems and reduces the wool's itchiness when you wear it during the day over the chemise, or sometimes, instead of it, on the very coldest nights, you might wear a wool undergown, a similar shape but made from finer, softer wool. This is less common for sleeping, since wool against bare skin can be intolerable for some. But if you've grown up wearing wool, as most medieval people have, the itchiness is just another fact of life. The wool undergown provides significantly more warmth than linen, trapping body heat in its fibers, especially if it's slightly damp from the humid castle air. Wool has the remarkable property of remaining warm even when wet, unlike linen or cotton, making it ideal for the damp conditions that prevail in stone buildings. Your feet are wrapped in wool stockings, thick ones that extend to just below your knees. These were knitted by hand, a relatively new technology in the 14th century. Knitting allows for a stretchy, form-fitting garment that earlier methods, like knoll binding, couldn't quite achieve. The stockings are made from undyed wool, a grayish-brown color that speaks to the natural shade of the sheep they came from. They're lumpy in places where the knitter's tension varied, and there's a darned patch on one heel where wear created a hole. But they're warm, crucially warm, because feet exposed to cold become painfully numb, making sleep impossible. On your head, you're wearing a linen cap tied under your chin with a ribbon. This might seem unnecessary, bundled as you are under heavy blankets. But medieval people understood something that modern science has confirmed. The human head radiates significant amounts of heat. Up to 40% of body heat can be lost through an uncovered head, and in cold conditions, preventing that loss is essential. The cap is simple, a roughly square piece of linen gathered and sewn to fit the skull, with ear flaps that fold down and ties to secure it. Some are more elaborate, padded, or lined with wool, but yours is basic, functional. It does its job, keeping warmth close to your scalp through the night. Some people sleep with even more. Bed socks, essentially thick wool tubes that slip over the stockings for extra insulation. Wool wraps for the hands, because fingers can become painfully cold, especially if you're someone who tends to sleep with hands outside the covers. There are even full sleeping robes, heavy wool garments designed specifically for bed, like bathrobes without the bath. These are more common among the very old or infirm, people whose bodies no longer generate heat efficiently. But they're not unknown among healthy adults on particularly brutal nights. The textiles themselves represent enormous labor and value. Consider the journey of wool from sheep to blanket. In spring, sheep are sheared, their fleeces cut away in one piece if the shearer is skilled. The raw wool is filthy, full of lanolin, dirt, vegetable matter, and often dung. It must be cleaned, a process called scouring, using hot water and sometimes urine for its ammonia content. Once clean, the wool is picked apart and carded, drawn across wooden paddles set with dozens of small metal teeth that align the fibers. Only then can it be spun, the carded wool twisted into yarn using a drop spindle, or, in larger operations, a spinning wheel. The yarn must then be woven, a skilled task performed on large looms. The warp thread stretched tight while the weft is passed back and forth, building up fabric, inch by inch. For a large blanket, this might take weeks of steady work. Once woven, the fabric is fulled, pounded, and scrubbed to make it denser and warmer, then stretched on a frame called a tenter to dry without shrinking. Finally, it might be dyed, though many everyday textiles remain in their natural wool colors, ranging from white to brown to black, depending on the sheep. A single wool blanket on your bed represents hundreds of hours of labor across multiple skilled workers. The same is true for linen. Flax must be grown, harvested when the stems are golden, then retted, either by laying it in fields to rot or submerging it in water. The rotting process breaks down the plant material surrounding the valuable fibers, but it smells terrible, a stench that marks flax processing areas for miles around. Once retted, the flax is broken and scatched, beaten to separate fibers from chaff, then hackled, drawn through beds of nails to refine the fibers further. Only then can it be spun and woven, a process as laborious as wool, but producing a fabric with different properties. The value of textiles in medieval society cannot be overstated. A good wool blanket might be worth several weeks of a laborer's wages. Your fur coverlet could be worth several months. These aren't disposable items. They're investments, maintained carefully, repaired repeatedly, and often listed in wills as significant bequests. When you wrap yourself in these layers, you're not just keeping warm. You're surrounding yourself with concentrated wealth and labor, textiles that represent the work of dozens of people across months or years. This is why textile security is taken seriously in castles. Chests for storing blankets and clothes are kept locked, not just against theft, but also against moths and mice, both of which can destroy months of work in days of nibbling. Woolens are periodically aired and beaten to remove insects. Furs are stored with herbs that repel pests, or in sealed chests where creatures can't reach them. The loss of a good blanket isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a genuine economic blow to the household as you lie in your bed, surrounded by these laborious textiles. You might not think consciously about their origins. You're used to them, the scratchiness of linen, the weight of wool, the luxury of fur. But on some level, you appreciate them. You know that without these layers, sleep would be difficult or impossible on winter nights. You know that the chemise absorbing your sweat means the wool stays drier and warmer. You know that the cap on your head means waking with less of a headache from cold. You know that the stockings on your feet mean keeping all 10 toes, rather than losing them to frostbite, as has happened to careless or impoverished people in winters past. The clothing you wear to sleep, simple as it seems, is the product of sophisticated understanding passed down through generations. Medieval people might not have understood thermodynamics or known terms like insulation and thermal retention, but they understood cold intimately. They knew what worked and what didn't. They knew that layers trap warmth better than single thick garments. They knew that wool beats linen for warmth, but that linen is better against skin. They knew that covering extremities, head and feet especially, prevents the dangerous numbing that can progress to serious injury. And they built their sleeping attire around this knowledge, creating systems of clothing that, while uncomfortable by modern standards, were effective enough to see them through winter after winter in their stone fortresses. As sleep pulls at you, the cap snug on your head, the stockings warm on your feet, the layers of fabric cocooning you, you sink into rest, knowing you're as prepared as medieval technology allows. It's not perfect comfort, but it's survival. And that's enough. In the corner of your chamber, beyond the curtained enclosure of your bed, a small brazier glows with faint orange light. You can't see it from inside your bed cocoon, but you know it's there. and its presence brings a measure of psychological comfort, even if its actual heating effect is limited. The brazier is a portable heating device, essentially a metal bowl on legs, filled with charcoal that burns slowly through the night. It's one of medieval people's most important technologies for surviving cold castles. But it's also one of the most dangerous. The brazier itself is made of iron, hammered and riveted into a bowl shape perhaps 18 inches across and 8 inches deep, mounted on 3 sturdy legs that keep it stable and elevated above the floor. The bowl is perforated with holes, dozens of them punched through the metal, allowing air to circulate and feed the burning charcoal inside. Without these air holes, the charcoal would suffocate and die. With them, it burns steadily, producing heat and, more dangerously, carbon monoxide, an invisible, odorless gas that can kill in a poorly ventilated space. Medieval people didn't understand carbon monoxide in scientific terms, but they understood that braziers could be deadly. There are accounts throughout the period of people dying in their sleep in rooms with braziers, found in the morning cold and lifeless, with no obvious cause. Smarter households took precautions. Braziers were never used in completely sealed rooms. Your chamber has a window that's slightly open despite the cold, and the door doesn't fit perfectly in its frame. Gaps that allow fresh air to enter and deadly gases to escape. It's a balancing act, getting enough warmth from the brazier without suffocating yourself in the process. The charcoal burning in the brazier was made during the summer, when fuel preparation occupied much of the castle's workforce. Wood, usually hardwoods like oak or beech, was cut into chunks and stacked in earthen mounds or kilns, then covered and burned slowly with limited oxygen. This process, called charcoaling, drives off moisture and volatile compounds, leaving pure carbon that burns hotter and cleaner than wood. A good charcoal fire produces intense heat with minimal smoke, making it ideal for indoor use. But the process of making it is laborious and dangerous, and only skilled charcoal burners can do it successfully without simply burning up all the wood. The brazier in your chamber was lit hours ago by a servant who brought hot coals from the great hall's fire. Using a metal scuttle with a long handle, he carefully arranged fresh charcoal around these starter coals, building a mound that would burn steadily for hours. Too much charcoal and the brazier might get dangerously hot, even setting nearby fabrics alight. Too little, and it dies out, leaving you in the cold. It's yet another skill in the vast repertoire of knowledge required to run a medieval household. The heat from the brazier radiates outward in a sphere, intense near the source, but fading quickly with distance. Stand directly over it, and you could warm your hands quite effectively. From your bed, 10 feet away, you can barely feel it, but its psychological effect is significant. Knowing the brazier is there, seeing its faint glow through the bed curtains, hearing the occasional soft pop as charcoal settles, all of this creates a sense of warmth, even if the actual temperature change is minimal. Humans are psychological creatures, and comfort is as much mental as physical. Some castles use more sophisticated heating devices. You've heard of places with actual fireplaces in the bedchambers, stone alcoves with chimneys that draw smoke upward and outward, allowing larger fires that provide genuine warmth without filling the room with fumes. These are marvels of engineering, requiring careful construction to ensure the chimney draws properly, doesn't leak smoke into the room, and doesn't create a dangerous updraft that could spread fire through the castle. But they're expensive, requiring skilled masons and significant structural planning. Most chambers make do with braziers or nothing at all. Another heating technology you're familiar with is the bed warmer, though it's cooled by now, having done its work hours ago. This device comes in several forms. The simplest is what you used tonight. River stones, smooth and round, about the size of your fist. These were placed directly in the great hall's fire, nestled among the coals until they were almost too hot to look at. Then, a servant, using iron tongs and thick leather gloves, extracted them and wrapped each in several layers of wool cloth. The cloth protects against burns while allowing heat to radiate slowly outward. These wrapped stones were then placed in your bed, between the layers of blankets, positioned near where your feet would rest. Stones hold heat remarkably well. A stone heated to near red heat can remain warm to the touch for hours, slowly releasing its stored thermal energy. By the time you climbed into bed, the stones had already cooled to a comfortable warmth, taking the deadly chill off the sheets and creating pockets of warmth that made sleep possible. Even now, hours later, if you moved your feet down toward where the stones rest, you might find a faint residual warmth, the last whisper of the fire from below. Wealthier households sometimes use warming pans instead of stones. These are sophisticated devices, shallow metal pans with lids perforated to let heat escape, mounted on long wooden handles. Hot coals go inside the pan, and the servant uses the handle to slide the pan between the sheets, moving it around to warm the entire bed surface. It's more efficient than stones, warming more area more evenly, but it's also more dangerous. The coals can spill, setting bedding alight. The metal can scorch sheets or, worse, skin if someone climbs into bed before the pan is removed. You've heard of accidents, burns, and fires caused by careless use of warming pans. Enough that some households avoid them entirely. There are other, more exotic heating technologies you've heard about but never seen. In some great castles on the continent, particularly in France and Germany, there are ceramic stoves, tall tiled structures that burn wood incredibly efficiently, radiating heat from their entire surface. These can warm entire rooms quite effectively, and the ceramic holds heat long after the fire inside has died. But they're enormously expensive, requiring specialized craftsmen to build and install, and they're not practical in defensive structures, where every architectural feature must be considered for its impact on security. You've also heard tales of Roman hypocaust systems, underfloor heating, where hot air from furnaces circulates through spaces beneath the floor, warming rooms from below. A few ambitious Norman nobles tried to recreate these in their castles, with mixed results. The systems are complex, requiring constant attention from servants who must keep the furnaces burning and clear ash that accumulates. There are also weak points in a castle's defenses, channels where attackers might introduce smoke or even infiltrate. Most castles abandoned such systems, if they ever had them, in favor of simpler, more defensible heating methods. Back in your chamber, the brazier continues its slow burn. The charcoal has collapsed into a glowing bed of embers, producing less visible flame but still radiating heat. A servant will come in the morning early, while you're still asleep, to remove it and dispose of the ash safely. Leaving braziers unattended for too long is dangerous. The charcoal can suddenly flare if a draft provides fresh oxygen, or it can simply burn through its fuel and fill the room with cool smoke as it dies. The stones in your bed have done their work. You've positioned yourself to take advantage of their fading warmth, your feet near where they rest beneath the blankets. The heat they provided, combined with your own body heat trapped by the layers of wool and fur, has created a survivable microclimate inside your bed. Outside the curtains, your breath would still mist in the cold air. Inside, cocooned in fabric and warmed by stones and charcoal and wool, you're comfortable enough to sleep. These technologies, simple as they are, represent the culmination of centuries of trial and error. Medieval people tried everything to stay warm. They burned different fuels, arranged stones in different ways, experimented with fabrics and designs. What you're experiencing tonight, the brazier and stones and layered blankets, is the result of countless cold nights across generations, each one teaching lessons about what works and what doesn't. Some lessons were learned the hard way, through fires or suffocation or frostbite. Others came gradually, small improvements building on each other. You think about the servant who heated the stones, who carried them upstairs while they were still dangerously hot, who arranged them carefully in your bed. You think about the charcoal burner who spent summer days in smoky kilns, turning wood into fuel. You think about the iron worker who hammered out the brazier, piercing it with holes in just the right pattern to ensure proper burning. All of these people, their labor and knowledge, have contributed to your warmth tonight. It's not perfect. The room is still cold. The brazier's heat doesn't reach you. The stones have mostly cooled. But combined with everything else, the bed design, the curtains, the textiles, the clothing you wear, these heating technologies make the difference between miserable sleeplessness and actual rest. They're part of a system, each element contributing to the whole, and together they create just enough warmth to survive the winter night in this stone fortress. As you drift toward sleep, the brazier's faint glow visible through your half-closed eyes, you appreciate these simple technologies with the deep gratitude of someone who knows what it means to be truly cold. In the great hall below, where you spent part of the earlier night, 20 people sleep clustered around the central hearth. They're not arranged randomly. They're positioned deliberately, bodies close together, creating a collective warmth that no fire alone could provide. This is humanity's oldest heating technology, one that predates fire itself, the warmth of other bodies. Medieval people understood this instinctively and organized their sleeping arrangements accordingly, in ways that might seem strange or invasive to modern sensibilities, but were simply practical necessities of surviving cold nights. Body heat is remarkably effective. A resting human generates about 100 watts of heat, roughly equivalent to a bright, incandescent light bulb. One person alone loses this heat quickly to cold surroundings. But two people sleeping close together share and retain their heat, creating a warmer microclimate around both. Three people are even better. A group of 5 or 6, pressed together beneath shared blankets, can achieve a level of warmth impossible for individuals. Medieval people exploited this physics without understanding the science. simply knowing from experience that sleeping together meant sleeping warmer in your own bed. You sleep alone, a privilege of status. But even nobles sometimes shared beds, not out of poverty, but for warmth and companionship. Royal couples certainly shared beds, though often in chambers large enough that they could have had separate ones. Adult children visiting their parents might share their bed. Close friends traveling together would think nothing of sharing. The modern notion of beds as private individual spaces is largely a product of central heating and abundant housing. When cold is the enemy, bodies are resources, and sharing them is practical. The servant sleeping in the hall employs several strategies to maximize shared warmth. Some sleep in pairs on the benches, two to a bench that's really only designed for one, pressed together back to front in what's sometimes called spooning, though medieval people had cruder terms for it. This arrangement allows both to benefit from the other's heat while fitting in a small space. The person in front is shielded from drafts by the person behind, while the person behind benefits from the front person's heat radiating backward. Others sleep on the floor in small groups, 3 or 4, under a shared blanket, arranged like spokes of a wheel, with heads at the center and feet pointing outward. This arrangement, which looks odd but works effectively, keeps everyone's head and torso warm, the critical core areas, while feet, which are less vital, extend into cooler areas. Often these groups include a dog or two, large hunting hounds that generate significant heat and serve as living hot water bottles. Dogs don't mind the cold as much as humans, protected by their fur, but they still seek warmth and are happy to press close to sleeping humans. Children always sleep together, sometimes 4 or 5 in a single bed, a tangle of small bodies that generates surprising warmth. Childhood mortality was high in the medieval period for many reasons, but the practice of communal sleeping actually helped survival, keeping children warm through winters that might otherwise kill them. Parents with infants often kept the baby in bed with them, both for warmth and for ease of nighttime feeding. This practice, called co-sleeping, had risks, particularly the danger of an adult rolling onto the infant during sleep. But the benefits of warmth and bonding usually outweighed these dangers in medieval calculations. In the barracks, where soldiers sleep, the arrangements are even more communal. Beds are often shared by 2 or even 3 men with no particular regard for personal space. These aren't lovers, just practical men who understand that body heat means survival. They sleep in their clothes, often including boots, ready to respond to alarms, and they pile whatever blankets they have collectively, creating a nest of wool with multiple bodies underneath. In especially cold weather, or when campaigning in winter conditions, soldiers might sleep in even larger groups, 8 or 10 men pressed together under whatever cover they can find, breathing into the shared space and creating a fog of warm, humid air. Monasteries and convents, where religious men and women live communally, have their own sleeping arrangements that balance practical warmth needs with religious propriety. Monks typically sleep in dormitories, individual cells just large enough for a narrow bed arranged along a corridor. But in winter, especially in northern regions, they might double up to monks to a cell, sharing the space and warmth while maintaining the modest separation their vows require. Nuns follow similar practices, though usually with even more stringent rules about separation and propriety. The practice of communal sleeping extends even to unexpected places. In castles, guards on night duty often sleep in shifts in the gatehouse or guard towers, and those not on watch will huddle together in whatever corner offers the most shelter. Kitchen staff sleep near the ovens, taking advantage of residual heat from cooking fires. Often in groups, bodies pressed together on pallets arranged around the warmth source. Stable hands sometimes sleep in the hayloft above the horses, benefiting from the considerable heat large animals generate, or even directly in the stables on particularly cold nights, pressed against the warm flanks of horses or oxen. There's a social hierarchy, even in communal sleeping. In the great hall, the senior servants sleep closest to the fire and have the most say in who shares their blankets. A senior cook or steward might choose a favored junior servant to share warmth with, offering protection and comfort in exchange for service or loyalty. Further from the fire, the lower servants make do with whoever is available, sometimes strangers thrown together by circumstance, all cold and willing to share body heat without much regard for preference or propriety. Gender mixing in sleeping arrangements is less common, but not unheard of. In family groups, obviously, men and women sleep together, and in the great hall, a household's members of various ages and sexes might sleep in proximity, but there are boundaries. Unmarried men and women generally don't share blankets or sleep pressed together unless they're family. And even then, there are limits observed more or less strictly depending on the household's culture. Noble women have separate quarters, usually guarded by older female attendants who sleep nearby. Though the line between protection and surveillance is thin, the benefits of communal sleeping go beyond physical warmth. There's psychological comfort in not being alone, in hearing other people's breathing, in knowing you're part of a group. Medieval nights are dark, truly dark, in ways modern people rarely experience, and being alone in that darkness can be frightening. Ghost stories and tales of demons are common, and while educated people might dismiss such things, in the depth of a cold, dark night, even skeptics feel better with companions nearby. There are downsides, of course. Snoring is a constant complaint. Someone always snores, often multiple people, creating a cacophony that makes sleep difficult for light sleepers. People smell the close, musty odor of bodies that bathe infrequently and work hard. Someone invariably has a cold or cough, spreading illness through the shared space. Privacy is non-existent. Intimate moments, bodily functions, nightmares, all become public knowledge. There's no way to hide weakness or vulnerability when you're pressed against 5 other people under a shared blanket. Yet, for all these problems, communal sleeping remains the norm for most medieval people. In your private chamber, in your curtained bed, you're the exception, not the rule. Most people, most nights, sleep in proximity to others, using body heat as their primary defense against cold. It's a practice as old as humanity, older even, since our pre-human ancestors certainly huddled together for warmth. Medieval society simply continues this ancient tradition, refining it with blankets and architecture, but never abandoning the basic truth. Together, people survive. Alone, in the cold, they might not. As you lie in your solitary bed, you can imagine the hall below, those 20 people arranged around the hearth, pressed together, sharing warmth and breath. Part of you envies the community, the connection, even as you appreciate the privacy and relative comfort of your station. There's something deeply human about that shared warmth, something that transcends the physical heat and speaks to our social nature. We are, fundamentally, creatures who need each other, and nowhere is that more clear than on a cold night when bodies pressed together mean survival. The castle's stone walls protect everyone from enemies. The fires provide essential warmth, but ultimately, it's each other that medieval people rely on most, the simple, ancient comfort of human presence in the darkness. The truth about sleeping in medieval castles is that it's not comfortable. Even with all the strategies, technologies, and arrangements we've explored, the braziers and bed warmers, the layers of wool and fur, the communal sleeping and curtained beds, winter nights in stone fortresses are cold, uncomfortable, and sometimes genuinely dangerous. No amount of romanticizing or historical distance can change the fundamental reality. Medieval people endured conditions that most modern people would consider intolerable, and they did it night after night, winter after winter, year after year. You know this personally. Tonight, despite your privileged position with a private chamber and a bed piled with expensive textiles, you've been cold. Not dangerously so, not at risk of hypothermia, but cold enough to be uncomfortable, to struggle with sleep, to wake periodically through the night, feeling the chill creep in as your body heat fails to keep pace with the stone walls, relentless drawing away of warmth. Your feet are cold despite the wool stockings. Your nose is cold, exposed to the air outside your blanket cocoon. There's a draft finding its way through the bed curtains from some unknown source, a persistent cool touch against your cheek, and you're one of the fortunate ones. In the great hall, servants sleep fitfully, waking when the fire needs tending, shifting position when cold seeps into whichever side faces away from the hearth. In the barracks, soldiers endure far worse, their quarters barely warmer than the outside air, their blankets thin and inadequate. In the poorest quarters, in the outer buildings and stables, people survive the night through sheer hardiness, their bodies adapted to cold through lifelong exposure. Winter nights in medieval castles aren't unbroken periods of peaceful sleep. They are interrupted constantly by the demands of survival. Someone must tend the fires, adding logs every few hours to keep them alive. Someone must check on the braziers, ensuring they're not burning too hot or producing too much deadly smoke. Mothers wake to nurse babies, pulling infants close in the darkness, then struggle to settle them back to sleep in the cold. People wake, needing to relieve themselves, facing the miserable choice between leaving warm blankets to use the garter-robe, the castle's toilet chute, or using a chamber pot kept near the bed for exactly this purpose. The cold affects everything. Your muscles are stiff when you wake, requiring slow, careful movement to avoid cramps. Your breathing is shallow, your body instinctively trying to avoid drawing too much cold air into your lungs. Your extremities, fingers and toes, ache with a dull pain that's become so familiar you barely notice it consciously, though it colors your mood and saps your energy. Morning brings little relief. The castle is coldest just before dawn, the night's accumulated chill at its peak, and rising from your warm bed into the frigid chamber requires genuine courage. Health suffers in ways both obvious and subtle. Respiratory illnesses are common, the cold and damp providing perfect conditions for infections. Arthritis plagues older people, their joints inflamed and painful in the cold. Chilblains affect many, painful inflammations of small blood vessels in response to repeated exposure to cold. More seriously, frostbite claims fingers and toes of the careless or unlucky, particularly guards on exposed battlements or servants, who must venture outside for nighttime tasks. Yet medieval people adapt. The human body is remarkably resilient, and people accustomed to cold develop physiological adaptations. Their metabolism adjusts, burning calories more efficiently to generate heat. Their blood vessels become better at constricting and dilating to preserve core warmth while allowing necessary circulation to extremities. Their perception of cold shifts. What feels unbearable to someone raised in comfort becomes tolerable, even normal, to someone who's never known better. Psychologically, too, adaptation occurs. When you've never experienced central heating, you don't miss it. When everyone around you is cold, your own cold becomes less significant. Medieval people develop a stoicism, an acceptance of discomfort that modern people have largely lost. They don't complain much about the cold, not because it doesn't bother them, but because complaint achieves nothing. The cold is simply a fact of winter life, as inevitable as darkness or rain, and one endures it because the alternative, giving up, means death. There's also genuine adaptation in behavior and routine. Winter in a medieval castle means life slows down. People go to bed earlier when darkness falls because there's little point staying up in the cold and dark. They rise later, waiting for the sun to warm the air even slightly before leaving the relative warmth of their beds or sleeping spots. Daytime activities are arranged around warmth, with everyone gravitating to the great hall or kitchen, the warmest spaces, for work and socializing. Outdoor activities are minimized, restricted to absolute necessities. Clothing becomes armor against the cold. By winter, you're wearing multiple layers all the time, never fully undressing, except for the rare bath. Your day clothes, your sleeping clothes, they blend together, with perhaps a single layer removed for sleeping and immediately restored upon waking. Your wardrobe isn't chosen for fashion, but for function, for its ability to trap heat and block wind. You own fewer garments than people in warmer times and places, but you wear more of them simultaneously. Diet changes too. Winter meals are heavier, richer, loaded with fats that help the body generate heat. The great meals in the hall feature roasted meats, thick stews, pottages dense with beans and grains, all designed to fuel internal fires. People drink more, not just for pleasure, but because warm ale or mulled wine provides immediate heat that radiates through the chest and belly. Spices, expensive but valued, are believed to have warming properties, and winter dishes feature more of them, pepper and ginger and cloves, that create a sensation of heat even if they don't actually raise body temperature. The social fabric of the castle tightens in winter. People are forced together by the cold, gathering in warm spaces, sharing blankets and beds, cooperating in ways that might be less necessary in milder seasons. Bonds form and strengthen. Feuds are put aside, at least temporarily, because survival requires cooperation. The lord and lady might spend more time with their household, less separated by formality, because everyone needs the same fire. There's a leveling effect to the cold, a reminder that noble or peasant, everyone needs warmth equally. Children born and raised in these conditions develop differently than modern children. They're hardier, more accustomed to discomfort, less prone to complaint. They learn early that life includes cold and that whining about it accomplishes nothing. They develop the skills to survive, how to position themselves near fires without getting burned, how to layer clothing effectively, how to judge when cold is merely uncomfortable versus genuinely dangerous. These are life skills, as important as learning to read or fight, passed from generation to generation. Yet, for all this adaptation and endurance, medieval people weren't superhuman. They suffered. They dreamed of warmth. They looked forward desperately to spring, to the first truly warm day when the sun's heat penetrates the castle's stones, when blankets can be aired and damp textiles dried, when sleeping doesn't require quite so much effort and equipment. Winter was endured, survived, but not enjoyed. The adaptations people developed were coping mechanisms, not indications that they were comfortable or content. Modern people, looking back with our central heating and insulated homes, our electric blankets and thermostats, might feel either admiration or pity for medieval castle dwellers. Both responses are valid. There's something admirable about their resilience, their ability to survive and even thrive in conditions that would overwhelm most modern people. The ingenuity they displayed, the technologies they developed, the social arrangements they created, all demonstrate human adaptability at its finest. But there's also room for pity, or at least empathy. They had no choice but to endure. They didn't choose cold nights and uncomfortable sleeping arrangements. They simply made the best of circumstances they couldn't change. If offered modern alternatives, warm homes and comfortable beds, they would have accepted immediately. Their endurance was necessity, not preference. As you lie in your bed, the night deepening around you, you embody this duality. You're surviving, using every tool and technique available to make sleep possible. But you're also suffering, at least mildly, aware of discomfort, even as you manage it. This is the reality of winter nights in medieval castles. Survival and suffering intertwined, adaptation and endurance, marking every hour until dawn brings light, if not warmth, and the cycle begins again. The night is deep now, that darkest hour before dawn when the cold is most profound and sleep, if it comes, is deepest. You lie in your curtained bed, cocooned in layers of wool and fur, the weight of the blankets pressing down like a gentle embrace. The brazier in the corner has burned low, its coals mere embers now, barely glowing, soon to be cold ash. The stones that warmed your bed hours ago are cool now, their stored heat long since radiated away. But you've survived. Your body heat, trapped by textiles and curtains, has created a small pocket of survivable warmth. And in this pocket, sleep is finally possible outside your bed curtains. The chamber is deeply cold, the air sharp and still. Beyond your chamber door, the castle sleeps. In the great hall below, 20 bodies cluster around the central hearth, where a faithful servant stirs and adds another log, ensuring the fire lives through until morning. The log catches, flames licking upward, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the sleepers shift and settle, unconsciously moving closer to the renewed warmth. In the barracks, soldiers sleep in tangled groups, their breathing synchronized in the way that happens when people share close quarters. In the kitchen, the ovens retain their heat, and nearby, staff sleep deeply, exhausted from the day's labor. In the stables, horses shift and blow, their large bodies generating warmth that rises to the hayloft, where stable hands burrow into straw, finding what comfort they can. The castle itself seems to breathe, the stone walls creaking and settling as temperature changes cause minute contractions and expansions. Wind moves through the corridors like a living thing, finding every gap and crack, whispering around corners, carrying the scent of cold stone and ancient smoke. On the battlements, a single guard walks his route, wrapped in every layer he owns, stamping his feet every few steps to maintain circulation, counting the hours until his relief arrives and he can descend to the guardroom's small fire. Let your mind drift now, following the wind through the castle, past the solar where you rest, down the spiral staircase where each step is worn smooth by generations of feet, through the great hall where the fire crackles and people dream their medieval dreams. What do they dream of? Perhaps warmth, certainly. Perhaps spring, when the sun returns and the cold retreats. Perhaps nothing at all, their minds too exhausted by the day's labor for dreams, seeking only the deep, blank rest that restores the body. Your breathing has slowed, deepened. The cold that bothered you earlier has faded from conscious awareness. Your body has adjusted, found its equilibrium with the environment, and now maintains itself without constant attention. The wool cap on your head, the stockings on your feet, the chemise against your skin, the layers upon layers of blankets, all work together in harmony, each playing its part in keeping you alive and warm through this winter night. The shepherd who tended the sheep that provided the wool for your blankets, walking the hills in all weathers, knowing each animal by face and temperament. The women who sheared those sheep in spring, their hands moving with practiced efficiency, leaving the animals clean and the fleeces intact. The workers who cleaned and carded and spun and wove the wool, transforming greasy fiber into fabric through hundreds of hours of skilled labor. Think of the woodcutters who felled the trees for your bed frame, the carpenters who shaped the wood, the charcoal burners who spent summer days in smoky kilns preparing fuel for winter. Think of the servants who carried hot stones upstairs, who lit your brazier, who tend fires through the night while others sleep. Think of the generations who came before, who learned through cold experience what works and what doesn't, who developed the techniques and technologies that make your survival possible. You are not alone in this medieval night. You're held by a web of connection, supported by countless others, seen and unseen, living and long dead. The castle itself is a collective achievement, the work of hundreds of people across years of construction, the systems that keep you alive tonight. The fires and textiles and sleeping arrangements represent centuries of accumulated knowledge. You sleep surrounded by human ingenuity and care, by the efforts of your community, by the resilience of your species. And now, let that knowledge comfort you. Let it ease you deeper into sleep. You've done everything necessary for survival. You've prepared your sleeping space, layered your clothing, positioned yourself for maximum warmth. You've used every tool available, every technique passed down through generations. Now you can rest. Now you can let go of vigilance and allow sleep to take you fully. The castle fades around you, its stones and fires and sleeping inhabitants becoming abstract, distant. The cold retreats, not because it's actually warmer, but because you're slipping into sleep where such things don't matter. Your consciousness narrows, focuses inward, lets go of the external world with its discomforts and demands. You're floating now, suspended in that space between waking and sleeping, held gently by your bed, by your blankets, by the quiet presence of the sleeping castle around you. Time softens. The hours until dawn don't matter. The cold morning you'll eventually face doesn't matter. There's only now, only this moment of rest, this earned peace after a day of labor and a night of survival. Your medieval world, with all its hardships and beauty, its coldness and its warmth, fades into the background. You're just a human, sleeping, as humans have slept for thousands of years, wrapped in whatever warmth they could gather, sustained by whatever ingenuity they could muster. The night deepens around you. Snow may be falling outside, silent and relentless, blanketing the castle and the countryside beyond. Or, perhaps, the stars are bright and sharp in a clear winter sky, the cold, pure, and crystalline. It doesn't matter. Inside your bed, inside your castle, inside this moment of rest, you're safe. You're warm enough. You're alive. Let your last conscious thoughts be gratitude for the wool and the fur, for the stones and the fire, for the hands that prepared your sleeping space and the knowledge that made it possible, for your body's resilience and your mind's ability to adapt, for the simple fact of survival, which is never simple at all, but is the result of countless small choices and efforts and acts of care. And now, medieval traveler, rest. Let sleep take you fully. Drift into dreams or into darkness, whichever comes. The castle keeps its watch. The fires burn. The walls stand strong against the night. And you, wrapped in wool and warmth and the care of generations, can finally, peacefully, completely sleep. The night is long, but you're safe within it. The cold is deep, but you're sheltered from it. And morning, when it comes with its pale winter light, will find you rested, alive, ready to face another day in your stone fortress. But that's hours away yet. For now, there's only the soft darkness, the gentle weight of blankets, the quiet rhythm of your breathing, and the ancient, endless comfort of sleep. Sweet dreams, dear listener. May your rest be peaceful and your own bed, wherever and whenever you are, seem impossibly luxurious by comparison. Good night. Sleep well, and may you wake warm and grateful for the simple miracle of modern comfort.